Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the New Hampshire Tech Alliance. My name is Jim Reedy. I'm Sheehan Finney, and the Tech Alliance is HR Exchange. This is our March meeting, and we're thrilled that you could be with us. I think the groundhog was right. We are having that early spring, which is a good thing for us folks here in New England, except if you are near the coast and have a little bit of flooding. But remember, this weekend is a very important weekend. Yes, it's the kickoff of March Madness, but more importantly, St. Patrick's Day on Sunday. And I will spare you that the stories of my heritage and the royalty that comes along with it. I will tell you this, that in my house these days, 24/7 Irish music playing. But I can also tell you this, never in my life have I ever had a green beer. It's an abomination, but I'll just leave you at that. So thrilled that you could be with us today. We have more than 300 people registered, and that's terrific. And it's an important topic too. But before we get to that, a little bit of housekeeping. And that is that the next couple of events that we come up in our program year, next month, April 10th, we've got Liz Bailey talking about the National Labor Relations Board and the labor law update. And of course, you think, well, we're not a union workplace, so what does that matter? Well, it matters to all employers. The National Labor Relations Act applies to nearly every employer out there. And there's some important updates, including some very recently, just this week. And Liz is an experienced labor and employment lawyer, and she will talk about things, again, that apply to most workplaces. And in May, I'm thrilled to announce that we're at our 36th annual Labor and Employment Law Update and Review. And the registration information is on our website at sheehan.com. We just opened registration last week, and we already have 150 people registered. Our capacity for the room, which is the Castleton in Windham, New Hampshire, and it's on May 23rd, the Thursday before Memorial Day, which is when we typically do that program. And it is in person, tremendous facility. But our capacity is at the Castleton, I think, is 325, and we sell out every year, and we are on pace to sell out by mid-April. So if not sooner. So encourage you to look at that program, look at the lineup that we have, and I think it's an amazing lineup. Some timely topics, some practical presentations, and so yeah, we're looking forward to that. But in the meantime, we have a very important topic to talk about today, and for those that are SHRM members, you know that this is an important topic for SHRM. Coming out of the pandemic, one of the things that was identified as not being subject to triage was mental health issues, plus also during COVID with isolation and substance abuse issues and self-medication and so on, and a variety of other issues, mental health issues skyrocketed. But largely, and for you folks in HR, you know that this issue remains in the shadows for a number of reasons. And our presenter today, Jen Meckel, is going to talk about that. And I'm just so thrilled that Jen could be with us today. Jen is a partner of ours in our labor and employment group. She's been practicing for over 30 years in the labor and employment space. I've known her for many years, and of course, she and other members from Cook Little joined our firm last year, and it's a terrific addition. It's like a free agency signing in professional sports. You get this great talent to join your team, and Jen can speak on a whole variety of topics for employers of all types and sizes, but today she's focused on a relevant topic, as I just mentioned. She's helping employers sort of guide employers in their efforts to support employees who are navigating mental health challenges. And just like any other physical or mental disability, it's unique to that individual. There's not a cookie cutter approach to this. And I'm just thrilled that Jen could be with us. A couple of quick housekeeping issues as we get started. And the credits for this program, the HR credits for this program, you will see a slide at the very end. Those are there. Plus, for those that aren't good at keeping track of that, Liz Tezick will follow up with you and send you not only the credits in an email, but also a copy of Jen's presentation. Questions throughout. You can put them in the Q&A section as you respond, and Jen will take those throughout and perhaps at the end as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this program over to Jen. We're thrilled that she's with us today, and such an important topic. So take it away, Jen.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jim, and good morning, everyone. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It is very unusual for a day to go by in my practice where I'm not talking with at least one employer that is trying to support an employee with a mental health issue, sometimes multiple. So when you think about how many years I've been doing this and how many people I talk with in a day, it's a lot. At the same time, there is so much to learn about this topic. And when Jim asked me to present on this topic, and when I was thinking about what I wanted to do, I thought, well, there are really two directions that I could take this. And the one that I decided to take, and I hope is meaningful for you this morning, is a very practical approach. And so what I'm going to focus on this morning is the why. Why does focusing on mental health at work matter? And I want to talk about prevention as well, because as employers, as human resource professionals, and other people that have a lot of influence over staff that work for us, we have a lot of opportunity to help with prevention. And you might think to yourself, how could I possibly prevent someone else's mental illness? One of the things that we're going to talk about is the role that chronic stress plays as a precursor to mental illness. And that's the space as employers, helping people to avoid chronic stress, where we can really make a meaningful difference. I also want to talk this morning about identifying the signs and symptoms, warning signs, if you will, that someone might be struggling with a mental health issue, so that we can then move to how to effectively intervene and fundamentally how to help. And then I have a bunch of information on programs and resources, both that, employers sometimes often or offer, or mostly offer, but then also some new resources that I've done a dive into that I think will be valuable to you. So the direction that I chose not to take is I thought, of course, when we're talking about mental health, I could do a nuts and bolts presentation about FMLA and ADA, because those are so important when we're supporting people. Of course, I will talk about those laws in this presentation, but this is not going to be a nuts and bolts on those laws. It's going to be a much deeper focus on mental health in particular. So let's start with the why. And I wanted to present you with some statistics, both because I think they're eye-opening and because I think it can help us as human resource professionals and maybe finance professionals who are in charge of HR, business owners, think about why should we invest time and attention to these prevention and identification efforts? Like, why does it matter? And according to Mental Health America, which is a nonprofit organization that's was formed incredibly to me. I learned they were formed in the early 1900s and to focus on mental health. Their statistics show that about 44 million Americans experience a mental health disorder in any given year. And when you start to think about how many of those 44 million Americans are in the workplace, this starts to coalesce and make sense. And I appreciated this quote from the World Health Organization, because without effective support, mental disorders and other mental health conditions can really affect a person's confidence, their identity at work, their capacity to work productively, absences, and the ease with which to retain or gain work. That gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? Some other statistics that really caught my eye were that, as reported by Mental Health America is making the case for mental wellness in the workplace, 4 in 5 employees, that's almost all of us, report that workplace stress affects their personal relationships outside of work. Those are relationships with family members, with spouses, with friends, just a deep impact of that workplace stress within the community and within employees' homes. 4 in 5 employees feel emotionally drained by their work. 1 in 4 are experiencing severe signs of burnout. Burnout is another precursor, of course, to mental health issues, and that's 25% with burnout. 1 in 5 employees will experience a mental health issue in any given year. And depression and anxiety, 2 of our most common forms of mental health issues, cost over $200 billion annually in lost productivity in the United States alone. And then, as I've mentioned, and it's going to be a bit of a theme, at least in the beginning of this program, chronic workplace stress and burnout can lead to mental health issues if they're not addressed. So part of what I'm going to talk about is how can we address that? Another part of the why is some other concrete things in my mind. When someone is struggling with mental health issues, sometimes, not always, some people are able to struggle with their mental health issues and still knock it out of the park at work, for sure. Other times, someone experiencing a mental health issue might also fall into a pattern of absenteeism or presenteeism, being physically present, but not mentally or emotionally present, not engaged at work. Quite frequently, we'll see reduced productivity when someone is struggling, reduced work quality, lack of engagement with the work, and employee turnover, which we know how costly that is. We're still in a time, depending on the job category and whatnot, where it can be very difficult to find employees. So we really want to focus on retention and minimizing turnover. A couple of other statistics that help make the business case are that depression and anxiety cost the global economy $1 trillion each year, predominantly from reduced productivity. So it's about 200 billion in the US, 1 trillion globally. And there are about 12 billion working days lost every year to depression and anxiety alone. So the costs are tremendous, in addition to, of course, just the human cost, the human toll, which is harder to measure. Another thing that I found interesting was that in 2021, Deloitte published a white paper that I looked at this one in particular because it focused on millennials and Gen Z people. These are people that were born between 1980 and 2010. And in talking with many employers, I've heard many people say that, the younger generation of people speak up more about mental health. Some people have expressed they believe that, younger generations experience mental health issues more often. I don't know that that's the case. I think there might just be more conversation about it and openness about it. So I was trying to quantify what is going on there. And Deloitte found in their survey evidence that for sure, millennial and Gen Z employees are more accepting of mental health issues. So amongst those generations, there is less stigma around them. They're more accustomed to conversations about mental health issues and advocacy around mental health issues. Yet, they still worry a great deal about stigma at work. Deloitte found that 6 in 10, so more than half, of employees in these generations report that they did not tell their supervisors that they were struggling. And you might think to yourself, well, maybe the supervisor didn't want to know, or maybe it's appropriate to have those workplace boundaries. The way I look at it, though, is a little bit different. I look at that as a lost opportunity, because when you think about how much money you spend in your workplaces on the benefits you offer, don't we want people to talk with us about their struggles, or talk with appropriate people at work about their struggles, so that we can implement these benefits and help them get to work, be their, best selves and most productive selves, and retain these employees? And in fact, Deloitte's paper talks about, in order to be competitive in attracting and retaining these employees, the millennial and Gen Z employees, employers really do need to be supportive of well-being, because employees in these generations will leave jobs if they don't feel supported around their well-being. So it is important from a competitive perspective. All right. So once we've made the business case for this being important, I wanted to focus on prevention. And this is going to get into the chronic stress piece. And I wanted to share with you a document. I learned this actually, to give credit, full attribution. Anne Zinkin, who focuses on mental health and wellness issues for the judiciary here in New Hampshire and lawyers. She is a tremendous resource for the New Hampshire Bar Association and our judiciary. And I reached out to her and she gave me some resources. And it was through her that I learned about the 2022 U.S. Surgeon General framework for workplace mental health and well-being. And I've given you a link to it here. Again, Liz is going to send you these slides afterwards so you can utilize this link. This document, and I'll talk more about it, has so many ideas and resources in it for prevention. It's tremendous. And one of the things in the introduction to this document that the U.S. Surgeon General noted, and I thought this was important too, for any of you who've been working professionally as long as I have, or perhaps longer, you might remember a time when there was such a strong positive connection between work and mental health, where working was really about purpose, dignity, and a sense of community. And there was just that strong tie. People were better from a mental health perspective, better off because of that strong connection at work. And as Jim was mentioning in the introduction, through the pandemic and continuing after the pandemic, we saw that those ties loosened and that the work and mental health connection has become less positive. Part of that, of course, is the chronic stress that so many people experienced during the pandemic. For folks that were working at home, there were far fewer boundaries between work life and home life, and more difficulty juggling the demands of work and personal lives, and less community and connection with more remote work and hybrid. And remote work and hybrid can be, tremendously powerful tools, something I utilize and so many others do as well. But you can't deny the fact that it is hard to maintain community and connection with people scattered all over the place. And the Surgeon General noted that many workers are no longer interested in sacrificing their health, their family, and their communities for their work. So if you have sensed a shift, you're right, there's been a significant shift. And this framework document is aimed at helping employers to rethink how they protect workers from harm, to foster a sense of connection among workers, and to show workers that they matter, and to make space for people's lives outside of work, and to support long-term professional growth. And the primary idea behind it is to prevent chronic stress. Now, of course, work is not the sole source of chronic stress. People have many outside stressors, particularly if they are food insecure, or if their housing situation is not secure, or if they have a stressful situation within their families. But work does play a giant role, I think, in whether people experience chronic stress or not. And we know chronic stress can cause physical health issues, as well as mental and behavioral health issues like depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, substance misuse, and can also negatively impact the mental health of employees' family members. So when we think about this, not only as employers that employ people that work within our own organizations, we really have a role as community members, because particularly if there are adults in a household that are experiencing mental health issues, there's a very significant impact on any children in the household as well. So I've shared with you, this is the workplace mental health and well-being framework. And I literally put a picture of it because I wanted you to see it. And then what I really wanted to share was this graphic, which for full attribution, I took right from that report. And I wanted to share with you some ideas around preventing chronic stress as outlined by the US Surgeon General. And I'm going to go clockwise around this graphic and start with protecting employees from harm, which really goes to two things. It's safety and security. And when some people hear that, they might think, well, gosh, my workplace is safe. We keep the doors locked. There's no violence. And, that's good. But that's only the very first level of things. When we're thinking about protecting someone from harm, you can see on the right-hand part of the slide that it's not only that physical safety, and of course with physical safety, it's avoiding workplace violence, but it's also making sure that people are comfortable, meaning like, do they have an ergonomic work setup? Are there any inherent stressors in the physical space that should be eliminated? But then psychological safety. One of the things that I found very interesting in another study that I read, it was a study by the American Psychological Association. They found that 51% of employees were monitored at work. And monitoring can take the form of surveillance cameras, or monitoring keyboarding strokes, or monitoring phone calls for people in customer service roles and that type of thing. 51% of people who are monitored at work feel uncomfortable with it, and it impacts how they think about their job. So that is in a way, that's a minor thing, and monitoring can have its place. But I saw, as a practitioner in this space, I saw a very large increase in monitoring productivity during the pandemic when people who had not previously worked remotely started working remotely. And I think a lot of leaders and managers had a hard time trusting that people were being productive. And so their go-to was to monitor phone calls, monitor keystrokes, and that type of thing. And my encouragement to you this morning is to think about what are some other methods that can be done? And what training and coaching can you offer to supervisors in the workplace so that they can do a more competent job of managing people in a trusting managing relationship without monitoring where it's not necessary? And to be clear, I'm not saying that we have to get rid of all monitoring because I understand that there is a place for it. Another point on this is thinking about enabling adequate rest. And when I read this, I was reminded of a law firm that I worked at years ago that literally had a room where you could go lay down and like take a nap. I don't know if anyone ever used it, but I don't think that's what this is getting at. This is not advocating nap rooms, but it is really around boundaries. The way that I think about this is if you have people that work for you, or if you're coaching leaders or supervisors, it's having them be mindful about, not sending emails late at night, expecting a response late at night. If it is convenient for someone to email late at night, they can do that, but maybe also add, I'm not expecting a response, or saying to their team, I don't expect for you to check emails after this time of day or on weekends, or setting norms that allow people to have some time away from work to rejuvenate, because that goes to their psychological safety and wellness. Also normalizing and supporting mental health. And by normalizing it, I don't think that means that everyone should come in and, talk about their therapy sessions, because then we're not having good boundaries around the workplace. But I think it's normalizing it in the sense that, these are benefits we offer, and that if someone needs time for therapy, or if they want to know about the health insurance benefit or any of these other things, that is completely normal. And for, those of us who are business owners and leaders and professionals, to be able to talk openly about, I need a break. I'm going to take a vacation because I need some time to rejuvenate, or that type of thing, so that people who are working with us on our teams can also see that. And another huge part of psychological safety at work is, focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which can be a program in and of itself. So I'm not going to do a deep dive on that, but it's basically freedom from discrimination, freedom from microaggressions, freedom from worries that you are going to be retaliated against for speaking out about important topics like discrimination, or harassment, or about safety issues and that type of thing. And that goes to one of the things, and I'm not going to do a huge tangent here, but just as we're putting things on the table about what we can do to help employees to prevent chronic stress, and what we can do to buttress our workplaces and be as supportive as possible, is thinking about the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's encouragement for employers to think about things like workplace civility. Because if you have a workplace where, certainly if there's harassment or discrimination going on, you've got to eradicate that without question. But even if there's a workplace where bullying is allowed, now bullying's not illegal in the United States, in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, US, it is in some other countries, but it causes these types of issues. If someone is working for a supervisor who continually raises their voice, or threatens people, or, puts a lot of pressure on people in an unwarranted way. Obviously, sometimes workplace pressure happens. We've got deadlines to meet. But if it's unwarranted, those are things that are going to really impact that employee's wellness, which in turn, remember, impacts their attendance, their ability to be successful, and our ability to retain them. So I'm going to move on because I want to get through each of these, but you can really do a deep dive on each of these topics. The next one is connection and community, and it's fostering a sense of social supports and belonging. And so thinking about how at work you can create inclusive cultures where people feel a connection. And one of the things that I think is simple enough to do, but it is so often overlooked, is to talk about the meaning of the work itself, why the work we're doing in a particular workplace matters, and how each and every employee's role is significant and important in accomplishing that mission, so that there's a sense of connection, a sense of teamwork, and a sense of, people not only collaborating together, but ideally having each other's backs, which also means that if someone is acting in a way that is counter to that, for example, if someone is constantly blaming others at work for issues, that's not tolerated. That type of behavior has to be addressed because it undermines the cohesiveness of a team, and it's not behavior that you want to foster. So there's significant issues around there. And I also note, just if you have a workplace where there are difficult personalities, strong personalities that intentionally or not may mistreat people, you are going to notice, probably have noticed if you're in a workplace like that, there's a lot more absenteeism and people are less engaged. The work quality is less good and people are just kind of getting by. And that is not what you are looking for, because the more you help employees to thrive, the better the work is going to be and the more successful your organization is going to be. So the next thing here is work-life harmony, which, first of all, I appreciate that they use the word harmony and not balance, because so many of us for so many years have talked about work-life balance, but sometimes things get out of balance. And I think we need to recognize that that is okay. It's more harmonizing these things. And one of the ways to do that is, when and where appropriate, I recognize this doesn't work for every employee in every job, but when and where appropriate, to allow employees as much autonomy as possible around their work, avoiding micromanagement. Micromanagement is a major source of chronic stress for people and a reason why people leave jobs. This also focuses on things like flexible scheduling, increasing access to paid leave, and respecting boundaries between working and non-working time. And, this is another, I told you that any one of these we could do a deep dive on. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is to read the Surgeon General's report and look at some of the other resources that I'll share later in the program. But really think about in your workplace, not just doing some of the things which are helpful, such as hanging posters about mental health issues and resources, which I encourage, but I encourage the harder work of doing a deep dive into what impact is our workplace having on people. And that moves us to the fourth topic here, which is, or third topic, excuse me, fourth, as I'm counting clockwise. It's mattering at work. And that is tied up with dignity and meaning. And mattering at work includes, basic things, fair compensation. They put it here as providing a living wage, but giving people fair compensation. And then to me, the next two are so important, the next two bullets that they have. Engaging employees in workplace decisions. Not only does that help people in their well-being and wellness, it helps to foster a connection with the workplace. But I can also tell you from experience that it helps the decisions to be better, to be more effective, to be more welcomed and embraced. Often, I'll see in companies where people will come up with big ideas, at the big table, big executives coming up with big ideas, and there's a top-down approach. And not to diminish the intellect or well-meaning of the people at that big table, but if you are not engaging with the employees who are doing the work every day and have opinions about it, I think that is a serious missed opportunity, and that decisions and approaches and policies and procedures and all that stuff can be better with input from the people who are living and breathing the work. And then focusing on a culture of gratitude and recognition, some of the basics where people are truly appreciated for what they are doing. And then the last one I wanted to cover is the opportunity for growth. And this is something that is really, I should have pulled a statistic on this for you. When we look at why people take jobs, accept employment, and why they leave jobs, One of the top reasons people leave jobs is because of their boss, that they want to escape. So that gets to some of these other things that we're talking about. But another top reason why people will leave jobs is that they don't see a path for growth. And growth doesn't always have to mean promotions, although those certainly help, pathways for growth and that type of thing. But I think it is incumbent upon us as HR professionals and business owners and leaders to think about how people can grow within their existing positions. What new positive challenges can be offered, what new technologies or learning or new way of doing things, so that we're thinking not only about career advancement, but in some places, there's not room for a promotion or room for actual movement, but that doesn't mean that people cannot be supported in their growth in their current position, which also gets us to ensuring that people are receiving relevant, timely feedback and that it's reciprocal. Like, don't forget when you're giving feedback to an employee to also say, I'm talking about how you are doing as an employee, but how am I doing? Am I giving you am I giving you what you need as a supervisor? So I'm going to move on from this, but I was so enamored of that graphic in the report and thinking about the positive impact that we can have, even if we can move the needle a little bit on preventing chronic stress. If we can take the temperature of chronic stress down a little bit, even just for some employees, we can meaningfully move the needle on mental health, which is ultimately good for business as well as good for our communities. So, how do we identify, moving from prevention to identifying mental health issues? How do we identify whether someone might be struggling with a mental health issue? On the next several slides, I have some general signs and symptoms, and then I have specific signs and symptoms of anxiety and depression. And, of course, as you know from Jim's introduction to me, I'm just a lawyer. I am not a doctor. I am not a psychiatrist or psychologist. So when I'm looking at these signs and symptoms, they are things that I've gathered from reputable resources, but they're not exhaustive lists. They're just things for those of us that care about human resources and work in this field and have responsibility in these fields. It's things for us to be watchful for. And then thinking from watchfulness to how might we help. So some general things to think about when we're thinking about adults and teenagers, if you have any youth working in your workplaces: confused thinking, prolonged depression, sadness, or irritability. A lot of people don't recognize that irritability is an important sign of mental illness. Some people just think that someone is grouchy or that type of thing, but irritability is something to pay attention to, particularly if it is a newer presentation by a person. Feelings of extreme highs and lows, excessive fears, worries, and anxieties, social withdrawal, particularly if that's a change for the person, or other changes like changes in eating or sleeping habits. And you might ask yourself, well, how on earth would I know whether an employee is changing in their eating or sleeping habits? But people mention like, oh, I didn't sleep well, or, gosh, I'm running late. I overslept my alarm, or couldn't get to work for this and that. So it's paying attention to those things. The eating, you might not notice so much unless, of course, you're working in person with people and see some dramatic changes, but you might notice, extreme weight gain or weight loss, unintentional, which you can key into as a potential warning sign. Strong feelings of anger. And the way that I think about this as well is when people seem to have difficulty regulating their emotions. So if people are prone to outbursts at work, for example, that can be a sign, because at work, people who are strong with emotional regulation don't have outbursts. They're able to regulate their thinking, and they're able to, use those tips and tricks to avoid outbursts, like counting to 10, walking away, taking a breath, all those things. Other warning signs are strange thoughts or delusions, seeing or hearing things that are not there. Having a growing inability to cope with daily problems and activities. So if you're interacting with an employee who had historically been a good creative problem solver and they seem to be coming up with a lot of roadblocks, that's a sign. Suicidal thoughts, of course, if anyone's expressing anything in that area of, wanting to end their life or not be here anymore, that type of thing, that is something that needs to be taken very seriously, of course. Numerous unexplained physical ailments can also be a sign, as well as substance use. So now specifically for depression, and I'll run through these pretty quickly because again, you're going to have the slides, but you're looking for things like sleep trouble, fatigue, feelings of sadness, worthlessness, or guilt, social withdrawal, loss of interest. Sometimes you can even see it with a person if you're interacting with someone, if they've gone from someone who used to be sort of highly engaged and curious to someone with a very flat affect, that they just don't seem to have any enjoyment anymore. Someone with trouble concentrating or making decisions, changes in eating or restlessness, or sometimes you'll notice someone moving in almost what seems an exaggeratedly slow way. And again, thoughts of self-harm, including suicide, would all be things to watch for as potential warning signs of depression. Warning signs of anxiety are similar, but a little bit different. They include, on the similar end of things, they would include feeling weak or tired or having trouble concentrating or experiencing sleep disruptions. But you might also hear people talk about excessive worries, feeling nervous or irritable, feelings of panic, or even physical signs of panic, things like an increased heart rate, rapid breathing, sweating, trembling, or stomach troubles, GI troubles. Those can all be signs to watch for. All right. Now, when we're thinking about intervention, what can we do as employers to try to help? I've got a bunch of ideas here, and they range from the basic to more complex. So let's just sort of jump in with it. The first one is educating yourself about signs and symptoms. And we've just walked through some of those. I'm actually going to take a quick peek here because I see that there is a question. So the question here is, everyone has bad days from time to time. So would you be watching for a specific period of time? For example, I recently had something happen in my family and I had a rough week or so and even broke down crying in a meeting. But I don't think I was having an actual mental health issue. I was just stressed about a specific event, and I'm fine now that the issue has resolved. I'm sure this has happened to others as well. So thank you for that question. I think it's a really important one because so true. Everyone has events in their lives that can impact them emotionally in the short term. And that does not mean that someone is having a mental health issue or that they have any diagnosable mental health condition. And so, yes, I would agree with the writer of that question that if we're thinking about an actual mental health issue, we're looking for a longer period of time. But my encouragement would be, even with someone experiencing something in the short term, don't be shy about asking the question. I actually have it on this slide. How are you really? And how are you feeling today? I think often in the workplace, we're afraid to ask the questions and people don't even talk about it. This also comes up in an issue closely related to mental health issues in bereavement. If someone experiences a loss, people often don't know what to say, so they say nothing. Similarly, if someone was having a bad day at work or a bad week at work and they were emotional, maybe even tearful, sometimes people just sort of walk away. They don't know what to say or do. My encouragement would be to do the opposite and think about the role that can be played in supporting someone, even in a short-term stressor, so that the short-term stressor is not prolonged, if there's something we can do about that. And ideas around that would be, if you were the supervisor of someone having a difficult week and they became tearful, pause and say, hey, look, it seems like you're having a rough time. Are you okay? How are you really? Or how are you feeling today? There's a lot of encouragement in the mental health community to focus on the question, how are you feeling today? Because it's a more concrete answer that someone can give. Whereas when you say, how are you? That's kind of a big amorphous thing. But asking those questions, and if someone is really struggling, don't be afraid, even if it's a short-term struggle, don't be afraid to talk about resources that might be available. And I'm not saying that if someone's having just a rough day or a rough week, you need to go all out and throw all kinds of stuff at them. But you can say to someone, it's okay if you need time. It is okay to take a day off, take care of yourself, and then come back. You know, just a resource of PTO and that type of thing. So I agree with the writer that we don't need to go all out with someone who's having a short-term issue. But I also think it would be a missed opportunity of support, connection, and fostering well-being if we just ignore it and pretend like, oh goodness, this person's crying. We don't do that at work. And that type of thing. That, in my mind, is a missed opportunity. And someone wrote in as well, that happened to me as well. And that the person writing in now says, my CEO noticed and stepped up and asked the question. And I hope that that was helpful. One of the things that we know from reading studies and looking at statistics is that sometimes it can make all the difference for that one connection, someone to take the time to notice someone, which is implicitly letting the person know that they matter, and to be brave enough to ask the question. And I say brave enough because it can get messy, right? It might mean that someone cries. It might mean that someone needs a day or two out of work or longer. And so that can get messy. That's nothing we can't handle. And the upside of taking the time and asking that question is tremendous in terms of the long-term relationship with the employee, long-term productivity, and, as well as the other just reasons we might do it as humans, but I'm trying to think about the business case as well. So what are some other things we can do in addition to educating ourselves about the signs and symptoms, paying attention and asking questions, like I mentioned? Interact with employees regularly and pay attention. Be a noticer. And what I mean by that literally is if you are working in person in the office, get out of your office. And I say that, with a smile because all the time, every week, if not almost daily, I am talking with people that are so busy that it is hard to get up and walk away from your desk and interact with people because you have pressing deadlines. What I would encourage you to do, easier said than done, I know, but what I would encourage you to do is treat with some urgency, like a deadline, the need to be interacting with people and making appointments with people in person or virtually to schedule time for connections, like, having coffee with people from time to time at work, or tea, or your certain beverages of choice, not an alcoholic beverage, as I say beverage, but, getting together with people to chat. And even if you're supervising people who are remote, doing the same thing. One of the things that I'm sure any of you who work remote have experienced is we schedule ourselves heavily. And we pop from Zoom meeting or Teams meeting to this meeting to that meeting. And what we miss out on is the connection that can happen when you're in person and walk into a room a few minutes early or just before the meeting gets started, and you have a chance to say to someone, hey, how are your kids? Or how did your move go? Did you have a chance to ski this weekend? Or, that's been a little rough with the weather, but, whatever it is that you've got some small connection and chit chat, that is a way to show people that they matter. The other thing about this interaction is it is difficult to notice signs and symptoms and to really support people if you're not interacting with them in that way. So that regular interaction matters more than I can say. It is tremendously important. And I think it is decreased since the pandemic, to be honest. And so checking in with people regularly, and even if you're having a business related check-in, you've got a meeting with an agenda, could you spare a few minutes at the end to say, okay, let's spend 5 minutes really checking in with each other. How are you doing really? What do you think about things? And are you happy here if you're dealing with a new employee or someone that you're not sure about, to say, what are you enjoying at work? What makes you excited here? What are things that you're looking forward to? And what about the opposite? How can we talk about that? Also, don't be afraid to go in directly, that if you have noticed changes, you can say things to someone like, you haven't seemed yourself lately. Is everything okay? And you can also get more concrete about that as well. Oops, I've got to I'm trying to move my screen here and it's not moving. Give me 1 second. There we go. The other point that I wanted to make on this is the importance of having timely, direct conversations about changes in attendance, performance, productivity, and behavior. And I point this out for a number of different reasons. One reason is something that happens somewhat commonly is that I will be talking with an employer that will say something to me like, you know, I was about to terminate this person for poor performance, or I was about to give this person a warning, or I was about to put this person on a performance improvement plan, you name it. But I hadn't done it yet. And now they've disclosed to me that they're experiencing a mental health issue, or now they've asked for FMLA leave, or they've asked for reasonable accommodations. All of which is fine, none of which is the end of the world. But what it often makes me wish is that performance management had happened sooner. And I think often supervisors, particularly those who are not really comfortable in the supervisory role, maybe they're newer to the role, or just didn't have a terrific mentor teaching them how to do it, they shy away from direct conversations and they will observe for a long time before taking action. And my encouragement would be that as soon as you start to notice a change in attendance, have that direct conversation using the objective evidence. Like, hey, you used to be getting here all the time. Your attendance was super reliable, and I've noticed some slippage in that. Is everything okay? And you're not in trouble. I'm just, wanting to talk with you about that, having an early conversation. You can also have a similar conversation in terms of performance. If you've noticed that someone's errors in their work have increased, rather than letting that go on and on until the point of real frustration, addressing it early, before there is frustration, so that you can just say, look, I want to have a conversation here. I know that you're really capable in this job. I've seen you produce terrific work, but lately I feel like I've been having to make some more corrections. Then I wanted to have a conversation about that. What's going on? How can I help? Making sure that you're making your expectations clear with people. It's also useful to ask the employee what they can do to improve. In other words, not always imposing suggestions yourself. Perfectly fine to make suggestions, but sometimes the employee will have their own ideas, and it's very important to engage with people because that's also how to show that people matter, that we're not just imposing things top down. Always ask how you can help and offer resources if appropriate, because if someone's like, yes, I am actually having a lot of time getting to work, to be honest, I'm having trouble getting out of bed in the morning. I haven't felt as motivated. Well, that is someone who is opening the door to a conversation to say, you know what, that motivation, it is something that many people experience. And maybe I'm not an expert in that, but I could share with you some resources that might be helpful. All right. Now, other tips on how to help if someone starts to share something like the example that I just posited, where someone was saying, look, I'm having trouble getting out of bed. Or if you notice, I've heard this a lot from employers as well. You notice that someone who is always very engaged in their Zoom meetings and Teams meetings suddenly doesn't have their video on anymore. And you're wondering what's going on. And if you ask about it, and if someone starts to share, really be prepared to listen. Like, don't ask the questions, don't get into it if you're not prepared to listen. So you got to be prepared to pay complete attention. No multitasking. And importantly, don't think about what you're going to say next. I think sometimes people who are uncomfortable in a situation or inexperienced with what to do worry so much about saying or doing the right thing that they're not truly listening to what is going on. I also think it's important to validate someone's experience. We've heard a lot about the term gaslighting and that type of thing. We don't want to do that. We can validate someone's experience, validate that something is difficult for them. Even if it wouldn't be difficult for us or others, you could validate that it's difficult for them. You can be empathetic. Encourage employees to seek support and use other employer resources. Always ask, how can I help? That is one of my favorite questions. And then importantly, you need to respect someone's privacy, the employee's privacy, if they share information with you. That's something that goes to the psychological safety factor that we talked about in preventing chronic stress in the workplace. And respecting privacy, importantly, does not mean keeping it only to yourself, because if you are not, in human resources, or if you are not the lead human resource person, you might need to share it with HR or others so that the employee can get support, but not to make it a subject of gossip or that type of thing, which I hope all of you that took the time to sign up for this webinar this morning are like, yeah, no, I would never gossip about it, but you'd be amazed how often people don't keep things private. So we have another question here that says, discussing performance is tough because when you address performance issues, some employees consider this as creating stress. Absolutely. I agree. I also think it's about the how you do it. Because if an employee is getting the vibe, getting the sense that you are discussing performance for the purpose of creating documentation and the purpose of exiting them, that is without question going to stress them out and make things worse. So I think it's really communicating when you're addressing performance that you're really communicating, my goal here is your success. I care about you and I want you here. And I know how talented you are, and I'm glad you're part of my team. And I think I've noticed some changes, and I want to talk about it, and I want to help you. I don't want for this to be a source of stress. Is that magic? And does it mean the person won't be stressed out? No, but it's a much different delivery than saying to someone, I've noticed in the last 3 reports you've produced, you have an increase in, whatever, typographical errors or incomplete thoughts or that type of thing. So I think it's really a whole other presentation that we do and that I think is so important, and to be honest, that I don't think enough people do training on in the workplace. I think it's an important training to do. It's one that we do and enjoy doing, and others do it as well, is teaching supervisors how to give feedback. And that includes, in my mind, not only words to use and not use, and timing, and asking for help, that there's no shame. In fact, it should be encouraged to talk with HR if you have HR at your business before you have a difficult conversation with an employee. If you don't have HR at your business to help you, another trusted leader or mentor that you can talk with, or call your friendly employment lawyer. We help people all the time as well, if you don't have someone else to talk with about it, but to be in the right headspace to have the conversation, and having performance management training at work so that people can normalize this, know who they can go to in the workplace for help with these conversations, and that they can do it well, I think makes a difference. But I'm not diminishing the point that pointing out to someone that their success at work is reduced is, yeah, it's going to be an inherent source of stress. But if you don't address it, I think it gets worse, because it's not like the employee thinks they're still knocking out of the park either. Now it just becomes some unmentioned thing in the workplace that can fester and cause problems that way as well. All right, what are some other things that we can work through here on how to help? Implement your resources. And here's where we think about things like accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And accommodations can run the gamut. On a later slide, I have a resource for you called askjan.org. It's the Job Accommodation Network. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but really think broadly about what types of accommodations can be implemented if you have someone with a disability. And remember, or if you don't know, then please do know that most mental health conditions will qualify as disabilities. Back in the day, it was hard for people to establish under the ADA that they had a disability, but that's been changed for many years now. It is pretty easy to establish a disability, and that's useful because that allows employers to have the interactive conversations, the interactive dialogue, to understand what's going on with the employee, to understand what their challenges and limitations might be, to understand the possibilities of how we can help. It's also about normalizing those conversations in a way
Because many of you, I imagine, might have tried to have the conversation with employees only to have someone wave the HIPAA flag. Hey, you can't ask me that. That's private. HIPAA says you can't get that. Well, that's not right. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act and parallel state laws, we have the right as employers to get certain medical information to help us to support employees. And employees have a legal obligation to participate in that. And I can say all that as a lawyer, and hopefully you believe me, it's true, but that's not really useful. In the workplace, it's around normalizing it and having a policy that describes this so that you can point to something to say, no, I understand your concern about privacy. HIPAA doesn't apply here. You can talk about what HIPAA is and when it applies, which it might not to your workplace because it really applies in healthcare settings, particularly where electronic billing is happening. But you can talk with people about how you will hold their information. You know, we do take privacy seriously. I'm only going to share the information with people who have a need to know. And if you're provided with accommodations, that doesn't necessarily mean that your supervisor needs to know your medical diagnosis. They just need to know that you are being accommodated in a way and that you've partnered with human resources on that. So normalizing the accommodations process, being prepared to have those conversations. FMLA leave, if you are an employer with 50 or more employees, then hopefully you are well versed in the Federal Family Medical Leave Act and being aware that FMLA leave is it provides leave for employees with serious health conditions. A serious health condition would include mental health disorders like anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, other mood disorders, and other mental health issues. And people might need time away from work in one chunk of time, several weeks or up to 12 weeks, maybe to receive a diagnosis, to try medication, or to change medication. Medication changes can take time, and that is a terrific time to implement leave if you are covered by the FMLA. Remember too that FMLA leave can be taken on a reduced schedule or intermittent basis. If someone needs intermittent time, to, have therapy visits, for example, or maybe to see a psychiatrist to get medication and regulate their medication, that could be an intermittent form of FMLA. If you are in Massachusetts and you're participating obviously in the Massachusetts Paid Family Leave Program, or if you've elected to do so here in New Hampshire where PFML is voluntary, or if your employee has purchased their own plan on the voluntary New Hampshire Paid Family Leave Program, that's another resource that can be implemented. And one of the things that I think a lot about is, are supervisors appropriately supportive of the use of these resources? In other words, we don't want supervisors to hear that an employee needs a leave of absence or reasonable accommodations and then have that supervisor like roll their eyes or huff and puff or whatever. We want to help supervisors get to a place where they can support an employee in organizing their workload so that they can take leave to cover a workload for an employee, whether they cover it themselves or with others, and then to ensure a smooth transition back to work for that person where there's really good communication about how things were covered or where they stand or whatnot. So it's not just implementing some of these resources, it is training supervisors and getting them to know about some of the things that we might be legally obligated to provide, like accommodations or leave, or other benefits that you might provide voluntarily that are helpful, and making sure that supervisors are supportive of those programs. And you want to coach supervisors on what to say and what to do when they're interacting with an employee with mental health issues, not just what not to do. I find sometimes in training that we spend a lot of time like, you can't say this, you can't do that, you can't do the other. And then people can walk out of the training room and wonder, well, what can I do? So I think it's important to focus on both. It looks like we have another question here. I have found that leaders have difficulty with understanding that anxiety and depression are disabilities covered by the ADA. What's the best advice for helping them to make this connection? For example, relating it to a physical injury or illness to help them with better understanding. That is a great question. There is unfortunately still a great deal of stigma and lack of understanding that exists around mental health issues. There's also a lot of, I don't know if skepticism is the right word, perhaps, but wondering. In other words, I have had conversations with employers where they will say, how do I know the employee's not faking it? But they just got a doctor to write a note that they need time away so they can do something else. So this lack of understanding and whatnot, the question that we're being asked right now is, how do we close that gap? There's probably a number of different ways to do it. One would be you could, go at it with, legal documents such as the guidance documents published by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission under the ADA that specifically talk about our obligations to provide accommodations for people with mental health disorders, so that you could show that. You could, accumulate other sort of legal things, letting people know, letting leaders know about, cases or instances where employers have been sued and lost, or had to engage, in expensive compromises for failing to accommodate people, some of that harder evidence. Or if you have leaders who might be amenable to it, you can think about bringing mental health training into your workplace for certain leaders so that they can be educated on these things. For example, there's a mental health first aid training that is becoming increasingly popular. There are different people that offer it here in New Hampshire, where I practice, for example, and that could be something you could bring to the workplace in terms of education. The other way that I think about it is some of the statistics we talked about at the beginning of this presentation, which bring it back to not only do we have a legal obligation to do this, but it is good for business if we support these things. Because if we don't, we are likely to have more absenteeism. In other words, giving someone a leave of absence, yes, is time away from work, but then we might have them more present and more productive when they come back. So I hope that helps to answer the question. I don't have a perfect magic wand on that one. There is still so much misunderstanding. I tend to go at arguments like that with facts and legal guidance and legal documentation, because that often gets the attention of someone. But I think education around these topics can help as well. Let's see. So now what I want to toggle to is employer programs and resources. And I want to give you some more statistics and some links and some suggestions or tips. One of the things before I do this, by the way, when I was driving in this morning, I was thinking that when I created my slide deck, something that I didn't put in that I should have in terms of what we can implement right away is fitness for duty. And that honestly could be a session in and of itself, how to implement an effective fitness for duty exam. I could talk about that for probably close to an hour, which I won't right now because I want to respect your time. But if you have serious question whether someone is safe in the workplace or whether they are fit for duty, there's a mechanism for figuring that out. And you can, in short, if you've got some objective information about performance issues or behavioral issues that are very concerning, you can think about putting someone on a paid leave of absence, and you can think about gathering information either from the employee's own healthcare provider or sending that person for an independent fitness for duty examination. And having them out. I typically recommend a paid leave of absence. It might not necessarily be required, but there are reasons why I recommend that, to see whether that person is really fit for duty. I do find that employees' feedback about that is that a fitness for duty exam can seem invasive and can be concerning to employees. So you want to implement it at the right time and in the right way and in a way that's supportive. I can also tell you that over the years, we have had, clients have had employees thank them profusely for doing it, because fitness for duty exams have identified, in some cases, serious issues for which employees were then able to get treatment and gain wellness. So there's that. So that's another tool that we have in our toolboxes. So what are some other employer programs, resources? There was a survey in 2022 by the Mental Health America that revealed that only about 38% of employees who are aware of mental health services offered by their employers would even feel comfortable using them. So remember that graphic that we looked at from the Surgeon General, with those 5 essential pillars in it. And one of those things was around normalizing mental health and normalizing mental health resources. I also think it's important to educate people about it. And I have some more thoughts on that on subsequent slides. And one of the things I would encourage you to do is to ask yourselves, particularly if you're responsible for benefits at work, ask yourselves what barriers to resource utilization might exist in your workplace and brainstorm ways to reduce them. And you might be doing one heck of a job getting information out there, particularly during open enrollment and other key times. Think about from the employee experience that when there's so much information coming at you and at once, there's only so much that you can absorb. So I've got some more thoughts about that we'll talk about in a minute. But thinking about barriers and barriers that might exist to resource utilization might be, number one, lack of knowledge that it's even offered, lack of knowledge how to access it, worry about cost, and there might not be any cost at all to certain of these things. Worry about stigma, worry about what their boss is going to think, all of those issues. And there might be things that you can do to tangibly reduce those barriers. So one of my encouragements to you would be to create an inventory of all of your currently offered resources. And you might have more ideas around that after listening this morning. We're going to run through some more of those things that you might pull together. And educate your employees about resources. And one of the things I think about there is consider doing consistent, smaller, like bite-size informational promotions, like a weekly or bi-weekly email about one aspect of a benefit or something like that. I know from experience when you onboarded a place, for example, here at Sheehan Finney, we offer wonderful benefits. And when I onboarded, when I joined the firm from Cook Little about maybe a year and a half ago, I was overwhelmed by the information, overwhelmed in a good way. The benefits are tremendous, but I'm an employment lawyer, and reading through all that stuff, my head was swimming. And so if that happened to me, think about what might happen to other employees. And is there a way to kind of put information out there in bite-sized pieces so it remains top of mind? And what I mean by that, for example, is what if your health insurance benefit offers some perk or reimbursement or something for joining a gym or enrolling in a fitness program or something like that? That's the type of thing that people might not have either paid attention to or might have forgotten. So a quick email now and again about like, hey, remember that our health insurance benefits offers such, thus and such. Or an email now and again about the EAP program, and not just your employee assistance program and the 800 number in the website, but maybe some specific things about what can be offered. And I've got some other ideas as well. And one thing that I've thought about is, what about putting relevant resources together in one place so it's easily accessible to an employee experiencing a specific issue? For example, having an information sheet somewhere on your SharePoint or intranet or whatever you use, or, hard copy in HR or for supervisors, about these are things that can support someone experiencing a mental health issue. Maybe a separate one for people who are becoming new parents or new family members, resources you offer around that, resources for caregivers for disabled or elder family members, all together in one place, and bereavement resources in one place. And those might be overlapping quite a bit. But the reason why I think this can be helpful, and I've seen some employers do this very successfully, is that someone could be like, oh, okay, for example, someone who's about to become a new parent might be very stressed about that and have financial questions. And maybe you offer some financial planning resources through your retirement benefit. Maybe you offer a lactation space for nursing parents, and that can take away a worry, and lactation breaks, of course. And, just whatever the worries that might come up with someone who is about to become a new parent, or for someone who's caring for someone who's disabled or elderly, which can be a huge source of chronic stress. What types of resources might we offer there? So it's thinking about culling things together, or curating would be a better word, so that they're easily accessible for employees and supervisors. Your organization might also already be offering more around mental health stuff than you realize. Your health insurance benefit, many health insurance benefits are pretty robust on this. And so it's thinking about what all is in there and how do you educate employees about it specifically. Not only at open enrollment time, which is, I know, a lot of work and important, but like throughout the year, how do we support people in using their health insurance and any related benefits, in HSA, FSA, that type of thing, making sure people really understand it. And if you see that someone is not utilizing a benefit, maybe consider from time to time, or if certain populations aren't asking, like, why aren't people using, the HSA, or why aren't people using the fitness facility reimbursement, or why aren't people using my employee assistance program, that type of thing. Short and long-term disability insurance. Many employers offer that on a voluntary basis. Many employees don't choose to have it. And then some crisis will hit their lives and they'll be upset that they don't have it. So thinking about what is the pricing of those benefits? What can we do to make sure that people know about it? Can you offer it through the workplace yourself? So it's not even not a benefit that people have to pay as much for, or if you're not in that position, how do we just encourage that for folks? Thinking about your PTO benefits, vacation, sick, time, whether you lump it all together or it's separate, PFML, where it's relevant, bereavement leave. Bereavement leave is sort of a pet subject of mine in a way, as someone who was unexpectedly widowed a number of years ago now. I can tell you that providing someone with 2 or 3 bereavement days in the event of the death of a spouse is not enough. So think about your bereavement leave policies and think about what you can do. And you might have limitations there, I get it. But think about what you can offer in terms of bereavement leave, as well as PTO and other supports. Also, in terms of bereavement, something that we've seen from other states that I've talked with some employers about implementing here is, what about bereavement in the event of miscarriage, or in the event of a stillborn child? Those are very significant life events that are, obviously going to impact someone's ability to be present at work and engaged at work. And so can there be an inclusion in your bereavement leave policy for time away from work if those events happen? I think right now it's California for sure, maybe New York, I'm less sure about that, but that have mandated by statute that employers provide time away from work in the event of miscarriage or a stillborn child. There's a question here that I'm going to take later in a little bit. Let me run through some more of this and then I'll look back at questions. So other things to think about. We've talked a little bit already about FMLA and ADA, reasonable accommodations, employee assistance programs. Probably at least a couple of times a month, if not more often, I'll be talking with an employer and ask them, do you have an employee assistance program? And the answer is, I don't know. And so be aware, whether you have an independent employee assistance program that's really robust, which there are some fantastic programs out there and I'm a huge fan, or if that isn't something that's within your budget, but you've got an employee assistance program maybe attached to your health insurance benefit or other benefit, find out what it is, find out what's offered, and make sure people can really get the benefit of their benefits. Make sure that you're promoting it. Fitness benefits, gym memberships. I mentioned that just because we know statistically that people who are engaging in exercise, it is a protective measure against mental illness, or minimizing the signs and symptoms of mental illness if people are engaging in regular exercise. Other supportive programs that can be offered that really help people with that work-life harmony is our flexible schedules, 980 schedules, where people work 80 hours over 9 days in a biweekly period instead of over the 10 days. Holiday shutdowns, if that is something that is feasible in your workplace. I know it is not feasible for all. One of the things that I read with a lot of interest lately, there was an article not long ago in the New York Times about employer wellness programs. And they were specifically focused on programs like, giving people meditation apps, sleep apps, things like that, which sound really useful. The data was a little mixed or not super favorable about how helpful that was in reducing stress for employees. But they found compelling information that providing employees with paid time off to volunteer or engage in a charity activity, whether it's engaged in collectively as a team or individually, can have a really nice wellness, well-being benefit. So that's something to think about as well. And then I wanted to give you these other resources that are available at no cost. And so if you're thinking, gosh, we don't offer much, or maybe my business doesn't have the money to offer lots of things, you can compile in your resource, in your curated resource benefit pamphlets or, resource sheets that you have, compile these free resources. Consider, for example, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, which people can call or text. I love that that's a resource that people can text with, by the way, because there are a lot of people that are not comfortable talking, but they will text. Think about the 211 programs that exist in many states now. I've included the websites for New Hampshire and Massachusetts here. The 211 programs, I actually heard an advertisement for the Maine one when I was driving in this morning. The 211 program in Maine, the advertisement I heard this morning was for their gambling assistance, which I did not list here, but the 211 programs can help people with various crises, disaster assistance. If there's flooding, like Jim mentioned, there's flooding on the New Hampshire seacoast right now. I'm not sure, I don't know anyone who's called 211 for that, but that is something they can help with someone who's experiencing food insecurity and they need assistance with food. The 211 programs can help with that. Housing and utility payment assistance, assistance and services for veterans, childcare, and more. So that is just a free resource that is available. There are also some really interesting recovery-friendly workplace initiatives. In New Hampshire, we have a statewide recovery-friendly workplace initiative. In Massachusetts, I'm a little bit less familiar with those programs. It looks like it's more in geographic pockets, but it's a way to participate in these programs if you're so inclined that can support people in their well-being and in their recovery. And it does not mean allowing people to, use substances at work or that type of thing, but it can mean allowing people time off for attending meetings, getting the medical care they need for treatment, and supporting people in their recovery, rather than moving towards immediate termination, for example. SAMHSA also has a national help hotline that I've included here with the number, and that can provide it. That's a 365-day a year, 24-hour a day free resource that provides referrals for treatment, support groups, community-based organizations for mental and substance use disorders. And then if you've not yet visited the NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness website, I encourage you to do that. Because I practice here in New Hampshire, I was on the New Hampshire website. If you're in Massachusetts, you can look at that one. But they have a tab on their website for crisis lines. And what I appreciate about that resource and would encourage you to look at is there are a number of very specific crisis lines. For example, crisis lines specific for veterans, crisis lines specific for people in the LGBTQ+ communities, and so on. So really thinking about those resources, which cost nothing, but allow you to support employees in their wellness. I also wanted to let you know that Mental Health America, that nonprofit organization that I mentioned to you, their website is something I think is worthwhile to spend time on. They have created a workplace wellness resource center. I've given you the link here. And that resource center that they created includes things like links for workplace mental health training. That might help the questioner who wrote in about leadership not being fully on board with mental health issues as being disabilities. The Workplace Wellness Resource Center also includes biweekly webinars on mental health issues at work, tips for wellness events, management practices that are supportive of mental health. They have templates and checklists, and they have mental health screening tools. as well as many other things. So I would encourage you to check out those resources. I also mentioned earlier that I wanted to talk a little bit about the Job Accommodation Network, which is a free resource that I try to mention every time I'm talking about mental health or physical health issues, or talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act or FMLA or whatnot. And if you go on askjan.org, you can find information on a myriad of topics. And as just one example, I looked at the resources they offer for anxiety, and those included tons of resources under the tab of anxiety in the ADA, accommodation ideas organized by limitation. For example, how to accommodate panic attacks, how to accommodate concentration troubles, executive functioning deficits, stress intolerance. It's all there organized by topic. They also have accommodation ideas by job function, such as flexible schedules, modified breaks, environmental sound machines. Sound and lighting can impact the work environment and how people feel in the work environment, and can influence mood and stress. Service and support animals, telework, supervisory methods that work well with people who are experiencing anxiety. And the askjan.org website also has extensive publications, articles, and blog posts, and that's just on anxiety. If you've not yet visited the Job Accommodation Network website, I would encourage you to do that, because you can find information not only about mental health, but physical health issues. There's a wealth of information on there. I'm going to check the Q&As right now. Someone wrote in, and thank you for this. They wrote in a thank you for bringing up time away for pregnancy loss. It's so important. You bet. I don't know why it's taken this long for people to focus on the difficulty that people experience with pregnancy loss, or even for that matter, going through infertility treatments. Infertility is a disability under the ADA. So people trying to achieve pregnancy or people with pregnancy loss, it is an incredibly significant series of life events that people experience. And when employers can support people with wellness initiatives and mental health initiatives around that, they can do a very good job. Someone else wrote in, thank you. And I want to thank Jim Reedy for asking me to do this topic, because it's such an important topic that I think we need to talk more about. And then there's a question here that says, how does one manage an employee who is struggling with an issue they've discussed with you in a way to help them still get the job done? This person does not want to take any leave, but they're not effective at their job right now. Okay, this is a great question. It is the type of thing that comes up so frequently. I don't have one correct answer, meaning there are many different ways to go about this. My best encouragement to you is to keep talking with the person, not in a way that's all over them in an overbearing way, but instead to say, I want to support you. I hear you that you don't want to take time off. Let's acknowledge what's going on with your work, and let's see if we can partner together to get you where you need to be. And to do that, as your supervisor, I'm going to make sure that the expectations are clear. If you need help prioritizing your work, we can talk about that. I can carve out extra time to support you in that regard. And I'm going to give you feedback, because I'm invested in your success and I want to help you get there. But what I think it really entails is direct conversations. And by direct, I don't mean unkind. I just mean clear that these performance issues are occurring, and clear that there are things that I can do to help you, and clear around what those are going to be, while also making sure that the employee knows if this gets too hard and if you want leave, there is no problem with that. Like if you are reluctant to take time away from work, I don't want that to be because of me as your supervisor, for example. Sometimes, of course, people are reluctant to take time away from work even when they need it because it's an economic issue, which I perfectly understand, but make sure that you've explored all the benefits available with them, so that if there are ways that you can support the economics, whether through PTO or short-term disability or paid family leave or other things that you might offer, that you've explored that. But sometimes that's not available and people just aren't able to afford it. But that's my best in a nutshell. It's got to be direct communications, frequent, an investment of time by the supervisor, but really making clear that the investment is to help that person be successful. And if they are ultimately not successful, they might not be able to hold on to their job, but it's doing what you can to support them. Someone else wrote in, this is a very important issue. Domestic violence is another thing that we deal with. Yes. And I appreciate that too. Next time I do this presentation, I'll add something in about that. When we're talking about domestic violence, remember that both New Hampshire and Massachusetts offer leave time for people dealing with the impacts of domestic violence. So you want to make sure that employees are familiar with those resources, and supports around that as well. But absolutely. I also, one of the things that I frequently do is add to my workplace violence policy a paragraph 2 about domestic violence, so that people could, word search the handbook or find a policy to learn about support specifically that the employer offers for people who are experiencing domestic violence. And then another question here was, I was curious about what can be offered to the dad when their partner went through a miscarriage or a loss of an unborn child. Really good question. The first thing that comes to mind to me would be bereavement leave, because that the parent who was not carrying the child still had a loss. That was their child. That was miscarried or stillborn. And so I would think about bereavement leave for sure. And then potentially, depending on how that employee is experiencing it, if they're having significant grief around it, or if they're having depression around it or whatnot, you might also be implementing FMLA leave or other things. But I would for sure think about bereavement leave and think about some really skilled supervision around there too. By supervision, what I mean is that a supervisor or human resources who is not afraid to talk to that person with, how are you doing? If things are hard, how can I support you? People who are grieving, there are some people who are very skilled in talking with people who are grieving and some who are not. So my encouragement would be to coach people so that they can be more supportive of those who are grieving. And I think the last question I have time to answer, because we're running out of time, will be that an employee has mentioned having health issues. They've been offered to take leave or reduce their activity level to work less hours, and they're still having performance issues. How do we handle? I think this is something that I hope I addressed it earlier by having those direct supportive conversations, but you don't have to shy away from the performance issues either. So we're either going to get that person on a path to success with the various tools that we have available to help people improve their performance, or ultimately they might need to take a leave, or if they don't, and if their performance doesn't improve, it might ultimately end up in separation. But that would be my thought on that. And then what I want to do is go back here, because Liz asked me importantly to let you all know before we conclude for the morning, that you can get credits. We are a SHRM credit provider, and here is the information for getting those credits. You will also get this slide as well as copies of the other slide from Liz after this. And I want to thank you for registering this morning, for listening, and for your good questions. And you can tell by the questions, this is a topic we could talk so much more about, but I hope the information I've provided gives you a useful overview and a means of talking about this more at work so we can keep the conversation going. Thank you very much. I hope you have a fantastic day.